This is JC Setting the Record Straight podcast. I'm your host, JC. On this channel, we set the record straight. That means we fact check and correct commonly believed misinformation and propaganda. Given the widespread mistrust of mainstream media, many have turned to social media as their primary source of information. The internet has become the new town square. It is where people disseminate ideas and spread information. Not only is it used by the public, but it's also used by the government. I find it amazing that Twitter had the power to censor a sitting president. In a marketplace of ideas, the solution to bad speech is more free speech. The solution is not to silence those of us who have dissenting opinions. All this does is breed mistrust. In order to have an informed citizenry, the public must have free access to information and ideas. When the public doesn't have free access to information and ideas, the result is tyranny. Although we live in an ostensible free society, this is a misnomer. Noam Chomsky wrote in his book Manufactured Consent about how the government keeps us enslaved by using the media to control our thoughts and to suppress ideas. Then the uninformed electorate uses the coercive power of the vote to enslave the common man. This is supposed to be their idea of freedom. The mainstream media has always been bought and controlled. Social media was supposed to provide a viable alternative. And there was a point at which content creators could express their ideas freely without censorship. However, due to the threat of demonetization and deplatforming, content creators are now pressured to produce unprovocative, watered-down content. The response by many would be that social media platforms are private corporations and therefore they're not subject to First Amendment limitations. Well, that's what I want to address in this video. First of all, just because an entity is private, that doesn't mean that the Constitution doesn't apply to them. If they are engaged in a traditional public function, then they can be held quasi-public actors. So, for example, when you have private prisons, it doesn't mean that the rule of law doesn't apply to them. They are still held to the same standards as a public prison. The reason is because they are engaged in a traditional public function. The same thing applies to these social media websites. Now, I don't know why no attorney has argued this, but they should have done this. A lot of them are cowards, and a lot of them won't do it unless some client is willing to pay for it. But Congress certainly has the authority and ability to regulate social media platforms that are in the public domain. So I just want to skip past all this and jump right into the argument that they can do whatever they want because they're private. Back in the day, there was no such thing as a private corporation. All corporations were public. They had to serve the public good. They had to serve a public purpose. If it didn't serve a public purpose, it couldn't exist. Another thing about public corporations is that they couldn't exist in perpetuity. So they had to be reviewed to ensure that they were continuing to serve a public purpose. We still have public corporations. An example of a public corporation would be bar associations. So they have sunset provisions, right? So they have to be reviewed. For example, bar associations have to get approval every 7 years. If they don't get approved by the legislature, then they are sunsetted. They no longer exist. Again, they can't exist in perpetuity. They have to be constantly reviewed. And so during this review period, there is an opportunity for public comment. When a public corporation is about to be sunsetted, anybody can come and say, I don't think that this public corporation should exist. This is the way all corporations used to be. However, there was a series of Texas railroad lawsuits litigated by robber barons. I believe this was during the 1930s. A lot of these policies came about during the Great Depression. The Bar Association, the notion of private corporations, while everyone was distracted with their economic strifes, they snuck a lot of stuff under the rug. So they created this notion of a private corporation, which is a legal fiction, right? This is what all of the sovereign citizens, which I know they don't like to be called sovereign citizens, but y'all know what I'm talking about. The Moors, they don't like to be called persons because persons are corporations, which are fictitious entities. They are creations of the state. And so what they're trying to do is make it to where corporations have more legal protection than flesh and blood human beings. But the problem is that natural rights are based on natural law. So corporations don't exist in nature. Therefore, they don't have natural rights. Corporations only have legal rights, which are man-made. So with the advent of the private corporation, now corporations can exist in perpetuity. That means there is no sunset provision. There is no public oversight. Now, instead of corporations serving the public, now the public must serve the corporation. And really, corporate status is just a smokescreen because now you're not talking about an actual human being. You're talking about an entity. And so people have no problem serving entities because they don't think about who's behind it. The same way they look at government. It's like, oh, I'm serving the government. The government is all powerful, all knowing. They just think, oh, I must obey the law. They're not thinking that they're being slavish to actual human beings, that they're obeying men just like them who put on their pant legs one at a time. So you have these giant corporations which are nearly, if not more powerful than the government itself, because they are in fact bribing the government, putting people in power. They're dictating their own rules. And if you look at the way the oil industry carries out its business, they write their own laws and Congress acts as a rubber stamp. The Federal Reserve also writes its own laws, which is why it has never been audited. So it's really hard to argue that corporations are private when they are created by the state. I would argue that all corporations are public. They are creations of the legislature. This is really a libertarian argument, and I doubt that many people would present it. But there is a lot of corruption that came out of the 1930s by these robber barons that exists now, and people are pretending that this is the way it always was. Now, I'm eventually going to get into the bar associations, but that's boring content. Nobody wants to hear that shit. I've been talking about it for years. I've been lobbying. I've been speaking publicly about it. Nobody gives a shit. But at the heart of many problems in America is the creation of the private corporation. Private corporations are running amok without any public oversight. And the only reason that they're allowed to exist is because we allowed them to exist. And I'm not sure that you all understand what this means, but because they are corporations, that means they're shielding the actual human beings behind it. Rather than doing business in their own names, rather than subjecting themselves to personal liability, they are hiding behind corporations. But there are real human beings behind all of this. And these corporations have nefarious intentions. We know that Facebook was lying to us because they were telling us to give our phone numbers as a security measure, right? So if we ever got locked out, they could verify our accounts with our phone numbers. Now, I was personally locked out of my account unless I provided my phone number. I didn't want to do it. In fact, I tried to use my second number, which is not a cell number, and they wouldn't accept it. So if I didn't provide my actual cell phone number, I would have lost all of my contacts. So I went ahead and gave them my phone number, and guess what? All these people started coming up as suggested friends. There were guys who I hooked up with, guys who I gave fake names, who now were able to see my real name because I came up as a suggested friend. But wait, I thought this was all about security. This was all about protecting our information and making us safe. It's bullshit. And then they turned around and sold our information to political firms. There's a quote by Ayn Rand, and it is, "We are fast approaching the stage of the ultimate inversion, the stage where the government is free to do anything it pleases, while the citizens may act only by permission, which is the stage of the darkest periods of human history, the stage of rule by brute force." So, although the government can't regulate our speech, even though they are, because they're declaring certain things to be hate speech, they are using these corporations as their own extensions to do their dirty work. Corporations are becoming de facto governments. They are just as powerful as governments, if not more so. And it's becoming mob rule, where the majority gets to dictate normative behavioral assessments and then impose them on the rest of us. If you don't follow them, then there are social consequences. Now you will no longer be able to work, which means you will no longer be able to eat. They will force you to starve to death just because you didn't go along with their bullshit. Meanwhile, they will continue making money off your content without giving you any remuneration, which is essentially slavery. At the very least, is unjust enrichment. So when I am finally able to speak freely and say the things that I think are important, my platform is going to grow exponentially. I am being held back. I am tired of having to tiptoe around issues and not being able to say things as they are. Unless I explain things in plain English, no one knows what the fuck I'm talking about. I try to throw these subtle hints, but people don't pick up on it. So I need to be free to say whatever the fuck I want to say. I'm so sick of these whiny crybabies and their fucking cancel culture. Grow the fuck up. This is like a scene out of 1984. This doesn't even feel like America anymore. The way that people passively and slavishly accept having their freedoms taken away is alarming. The government is importing socialists to America so that they will outnumber those of us who actually believe in freedom. This is what happens when you have a government of mob rule. The majority tramples over the rights of the minority. Individual rights no longer exist. And all that matters is some nebulous notion of the common good. The public is undefined and undefinable. Nothing can benefit the public unless it benefits the individual. The public is just a collection of individuals. The government cannot serve the interests of the public without protecting the rights of individuals. Thanks for your support. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you will know when I upload new content.